In the twilight hush of the colonies, where the Rimmer trade route threads through the CERN sector, lies Ghorman, a planet of quiet industry and silken artistry. Here, beneath crystalline canopies, Gorlectipods spin their luminous webs, weaving Ghorman twill that graces the garments of dignitaries across the galaxy. The land, rich with calcite ore, pulses with untapped energy, drawing the Empire's covetous gaze. The Ghormans, stewards of this delicate balance, have long lived in harmony with their environment. Their society, woven with threads of tradition and resilience, thrives on the fruits of their labor. Yet, as the Empire's shadow stretches further, the weight of oppressive taxation begins to fray the fabric of their community. Local leaders, voices of reason and guardians of heritage, convene beneath the glimmering webs to address the encroaching threat. They organize peaceful protests, standing firm against the economic stranglehold imposed by distant rulers who neither know nor care for Ghorman's way of life. Their dissent is not born of rebellion, but of a desperate plea to preserve their identity and autonomy. As whispers of resistance ripple through the silk-laden forests, the Empire takes notice. The arrival of Imperial forces looms on the horizon, a harbinger of the storm to come. The Ghormans stand at a crossroads, their peaceful defiance poised to ignite a fire that may consume more than just their own world. Dawn crept across Ghorman like a silent tide, turning crystalline trees to prisms and the rippling rivers to threads of molten silver. In the pale light, the distant outlines of Imperial star destroyers emerged above the horizon, sleek silhouettes arching across twin suns, casting long shadows over the emerald forests. Whispers of awe and dread swirled through village markets as citizens paused, gazing skyward at the ships that eclipsed their world's gentle dawn. Among the chrome banners fluttering on each destroyer's prow, the crest of the Empire gleamed with cold authority. Below, Tarkin's flagship, the Judicator, settled into orbit with a quiet inevitability, its gleaming hull reflecting the sunrise in shards of harsh brilliance. Word spread quickly. Governor Wilhuff Tarkin had arrived under the guise of economic oversight, sent to inspect Ghorman's calcite mines and silk cooperatives. His reputation, however, preceded him. An officer whose methods were as unyielding as beskar, whose mind valued order above all else. At the newly erected Imperial Plaza in the capital city of Spinny, holographic screens flared to life with Tarkin's message. His visage, stern and unsmiling, spoke of Ghorman's prosperity as a dangerous excess. "Your calcite exports have spiked beyond acceptable levels," he intoned, voice measured yet chilling. "Silk production, once a cultural treasure, now threatens to fuel sedition. The Emperor demands new taxes to restore balance." Behind him, rows of uniformed officers stood like statues, their presence a silent reminder of the consequences for disobedience. Local leaders gathered beneath the holograms, their faces lit by the harsh glow of Tarkin's declaration. Some mouths fell open in disbelief, others clenched in silent fury. The tax levies proposed were ruinous. Levies so steep that they would consume more than half of every weaver's earnings and force the shutdown of entire calcite shafts. To the Ghormans, whose lives were interwoven with the harvests of silk and ore, this was no mere fiscal adjustment, but a threat to their very existence. Imperial propagandists, embedded within local hollow news networks, began to shape the narrative. Bulletins spoke of Ghorman elites hoarding wealth, while loyal citizens struggled beneath inflated prices. Images of opulent silken finery faded into stark contrasts with hungry children and shuttered workshops. The Empire painted Dissent as the work of a privileged few. while framing compliance as a civic duty to sustain the greater good. This insidious campaign seeped into every corridor and alley, sowing distrust among neighbors and testing the fabric of unity that had sustained the planet for generations. Yet beneath the veneer of compliance, embers of resistance still glowed. Secret gatherings convened in caverns carved from calcite veins, where activists and artisans whispered rebuttals to Imperial claims. They drafted petitions, composed hymns of defiance, and pressed messages onto silk banners destined to flutter in quiet protest. It was in these hidden sanctuaries that the true spirit of Ghorman held fast, a belief that prosperity was not treason, but the reward of toil and tradition. As Tarkin's days on Ghorman lengthened, his patrols grew more frequent and his demands more exacting. Imperial officers trampled through fields of spider silk, interrogating weavers and mapping mine shafts with unblinking precision. The once luminous forests echoed with the drone of maglev transports, carrying sacks of calcite ore to waiting starships. With each passing sunrise, the planet's bounty flowed further into Imperial coffers, its possibilities narrowed beneath Tarkin's iron gaze. Yet in the shadow of those looming destroyers, the planet's people found unexpected solidarity. Weavers who had once competed for trade contracts now shared looms. Miners pooled their tools to protect one another from Imperial requisitions. Even children, who had grown up chasing silk gliders among tree branches, whispered tales of the day the stars fell from the sky, imagining a resistance that would send those destroyers back into the void. And so, as the twin suns climbed higher, Tarkin's inspections edged ever closer to confrontation. His demands teetered on the brink of outrage, and the planet's unity braced for the tipping point. The lights of silent camps flickered among the calcite outcrops, and hidden voices carried hymns of unyielding hope. In that fragile dawn, the stage was set for a standoff that would ignite Ghorman's fate and echo through the galaxy as a catalyst for rebellion. Morning on Ghorman dawned in cool, lavender light, the planetary rings arcing across the sky like silent sentinels. Word of Moff Tarkin's arrival spread swiftly through the villages and factories, carried on whispers and embroidered silk banners alike. By midday, a throng of protestors had gathered at the Imperial landing pad on the outskirts of Spinney, their numbers swelling like tide against a rocky shore. They came armed with little more than their voices, their grievances woven into hand-painted signs that caught the sunlight. Tax the Empire, not our looms. Hands off Ghorman's silk, and justice, not exploitation. At the front of the crowd stood Eldra Norris, a silk weaver whose family had tended Ghorman's luminous spiders for generations. Her grey hair was braided with silver thread, and her eyes burned with quiet resolve as she raised her placard high. Beside her, miners draped in ochre dust robes formed a human barricade, their shoulders touching in solidarity. Behind them, artisans and farmers pressed close, their faces alight with hope and fear in equal measure. Together they formed an unbroken line across the landing pad's ramp, a living wall of peaceful defiance. Above, Tarkin's personal shuttle descended on a cushion of repulsor lift energy, stirring dust and petals from the surrounding crates of fresh silk and unrefined calcite ore. The crowd held its breath as the ramp hissed open. Imperial officers in black uniforms emerged first, their polished boots clicking on metal plating. They expected a ceremonial greeting, perhaps a nervous salute, but instead found themselves confronted by outstretched hands bearing petitions and by eyes unflinching in their demand for justice. When Tarkin himself appeared at the head of the formation, his stern expression betrayed no surprise. He surveyed the gathering with cold appraisal, fingers steepled beneath his chin. Behind him, a lone band played a mournful dirge on hollow reeds, its notes drifting across the crowd like a lament. Tarkin's voice, when he finally spoke, cut through the music and murmurs like a sharpened blade. "Citizens of Ghorman, your tax assessments are final. Step aside or be removed." In that moment, Eldra Norris stepped forward, her placard lowered, but her posture unwavering. She called out, her voice both soft and clear. "We harvest silk beneath your twin suns. We refine calcite for your starships. We ask only for fairness, not ruin." Her words rippled through the crowd, awakening something deeper than anger, a collective reckoning that their labor was not a privilege to be taxed into oblivion, but a gift to be respected. Imperial officers hesitated. For a heartbeat, the gap between command and compassion flickered. Then, at Tarkin's signal, they advanced. Rows of troopers moved methodically, bayonets gleaming as they formed wedge formations. Dragoons blocked side passages. A single shot rang out, unintentionally, or so an officer claimed, and the tension snapped. As troopers gripped protestors and dragged them aside, the crowd held firm. Silk-draped hands locked together in silent resistance as banners fluttered like fragile wings. Eldra moved along the barricade, whispering encouragement to each detained neighbor, never raising her voice above the hum of solidarity. The chant began low, a single note of defiance. "No more taxes, no more chains." It grew, a swelling chorus that filled the morning air with unspoken promise. Tarkin watched impassively as the first protesters were carried onto the shuttle's lower deck. He felt no pity, no remorse, only the cold logic of order maintained. Yet even he could not ignore the fervor etched on every face, the unbreakable thread of unity binding them together. When the last of the placards was slipped from a soldier's grasp, the chant continued to echo across the pad, bouncing off crystal spires and distant hills. At the edges of the blockade, unseen cameras recorded every moment, Imperial holoscreens ready to replay the scene as evidence of rebellion rather than rightful grievance. Propaganda officers would spin this standoff into proof of seditious foment, they calculated, convincing distant systems that Ghorman's people were mere agitators, not stewards of silk and ore. Already, unseen hands began typing false transcripts and doctored panoramas for distribution across the sector. But on Ghorman itself, the story was written in the hearts of its people. As the shuttle's engines roared to life, lifting the captives into orbit, their cries of protest followed like a tide unwilling to ebb. Eldra Norris remained last on the pad, her hands folded in silent prayer for the safe return of her friends. Around her, others knelt to gather up fallen banners, worn through with folds and tears, but still alight with conviction. Above, a lone starfighter banked overhead, its pilot a silent witness to the unarmed courage below. In the fields beyond the landing pad, villagers paused in their work, watching the sky darken with the shuttle's shadow. A child reached for her mother's hand. A miner paused on his way to the shafts. Across Ghorman, the blockade's spirit spread, a gentle spark igniting the resolve of those who had not yet dared to stand. As dusk painted the forest in shades of indigo and gold, the landing pad lay empty once more, save for scattered placard fragments and footprints pressed into the metal. The blockade had held, if only for a moment, a testament to civil disobedience as moral imperative. It was a stand witnessed by the Empire's mightiest officer and recorded for posterity, one that would echo through Senate chambers and secret meeting halls alike. In the haze of twilight, the people of Ghorman returned to their homes, carrying with them the memory of that stand. They knew the path ahead would demand more sacrifice, that Tarkin's response would come with iron force. Yet they also carried a seed of hope that in their unity lay the power to shape destiny. A blood-red sunset bled across Ghorman's crystalline treetops, igniting the horizon in molten fire. The Imperial cruiser Judicator hung low above the plaza, its hull plates catching the dying light and reflecting a grotesque mosaic of fractured faces. Below, the shards of protest, discarded placards and tattered banners lay scattered among crushed petals and trampled cobweb silks. Silence prevailed where voices once rose as one. Captain Wilhuf Tarkin stood on the bridge's observation deck, his silhouette rigid against the glow. He turned to the comm officer. "Proceed," he ordered, voice as cold and unyielding as beskar. In that single word, the fragile piece shattered. Sirens wailed, and hydraulic gears hissed as the cruiser descended. The ground trembled beneath the thruster's roar. On the landing pad, Eldra Norris felt the tremor in her bones before she glimpsed the approaching shadow. She grasped the shoulder of a nearby artisan, whispering a final word of comfort. Around her, miners formed their line once more, shoulders squared in defiance. Children cowered behind their parents, eyes wide, as hull plates, vast as a moon, lowered like a mechanized blade. The first touch of metal on ground sent a shockwave through the plaza. Dust coiled in choking spirals, and the air filled with the acrid stench of exhaust. Tarkin's officers disembarked swiftly, their boots stamping authority into the earth. They wielded blasters and datapads, recording the names of every soul in their path. Yet the citizens held their ground in an act of moral conviction. If steel must fall, then it would do so upon unarmed bodies, not pliant dissenters. A rank of stormtroopers marched forward, rifles leveled. The artisan banners snapped in fierce gusts from the thrusters, their silk threads tangling with dispatched petals. Tarkin watched from above, his expression unreadable as the troopers tightened their formation around the barricade. With each step, the soldiers erased more of the human wall, fingers clamping onto arms and hauling citizens aside with mechanical efficiency. In the mass of bodies, Eldra struggled to keep her footing, her braided hair whipping across her face. She met the gaze of a young miner, barely 17, who trembled beneath a trooper's grip. She mouthed an apology, a silent acknowledgement of the injustice unfolding. Nearby, an elderly weaver knelt to gather a fallen banner, only to be shoved aside by an officer's boot. Above the cacophony, Tarkin gave a curt nod. 2 heavy equipment droids rolled forward, their hydraulic arms lowering retractable skirts beneath the cruiser's belly. In a thunderous exhalation, the Judicator expelled a wave of stabilizer fire, uprooting silken webs and crushing protestors beneath its vast undercarriage. The sound was a terrible symphony, metal scraping flesh, dampened cries swallowed by engines, and the endless whir of servos resetting. When the firing ceased, the plaza lay transformed into a tableau of ruin. Bodies lay strewn in silent testament to authority wielded without conscience. A single planter, once brimming with calcite flowers, sat overturned, petals splayed like spilled blood. Broken banners, still fluttering, caught on twisted metal poles, their slogans of hope reduced to charred fragments. Tarkin stepped off the bridge into the smouldering square, flanked by officers who breathed steadily through respirators. He surveyed the aftermath without a flicker of remorse. "This world will learn its place," he declared, voice echoing beneath the cruiser's hull. "Order is restored." Yet in the smouldering ruins, order found no root. From beneath the steel's shadow, a soft moan rose, a protest reborn in the wounded. Eldra Norris, her arm pinned beneath a seat strut, forced herself upward, gathering strength from each breath. She tore the hem of her robe and pressed it to a bleeding miner's wound. Around her, others stirred, shaken but unbroken. As officers stamped holodoc tags on fallen bodies and herded survivors toward waiting transports, the seeds of rage and sorrow took hold. In hushed tones, villagers shared names and vows, promising remembrance. Each life extinguished by the cruiser's descent became a rallying cry, a testament that even steel could not silence their yearning for justice. Above, the cruiser's pallets raised once more, hoisting the wounded and the dying into its cavernous hold. Passengers of repression were carried away, but the echo of their pain remained etched into every surface. The sun finally sank behind Ghorman's rings, leaving the world to darkness and flickering emergency lights. That night, beneath the shattered spires, clandestine fires were kindled. Silent circles formed around makeshift altars of silk and calcite shards. Eldra's voice, though hoarse, recited names, each one a promise to remember, each promise a vow to stand again. In the stillness, the planet found its resolve. The massacre's steel and silence would not quench their spirit. It would forge it anew. In the chill afterglow of flame-lit skies, Ghorman survivors awoke to a world unrecognizable. The crystalline trees, once perfect prisms of dawn, stood shattered like blown glass, their silvered branches strewn across fields of crushed calcite. Beneath a sky still streaked with smoke, villagers emerged from hiding, silk weavers with ash-streaked robes, miners whose calloused hands trembled, and children who blinked against tears as they gazed upon broken homes. None spoke at first. Grief hung between them like a weight too vast for words. At the heart of Spinney's ruined plaza, Eldra Norris knelt beside a shallow crater where the Judicator's stabilizers had pinned the crowd. She placed a trembling hand upon the cold metal rim and closed her eyes, feeling the echo of each life extinguished there. One by one, others came forward, farmers carrying lanterns, artisans bearing woven banners stitched with names, and parents cradling their lost in memory. Together they formed a circle, the lantern's flickering glow painting their faces with sorrow and determination. In quiet clusters around the square, factions that had once stood divided by profession and creed now found unity in shared anguish. Silk Guild leaders offered their threads to fashion shrouds for the fallen. Miners fetched sculpted calcite shards to erect stoic markers. Local healers prepared bitter herbs to staunch wounds of the living. Among them, Gialor Trem, a former tax collector now cast out for his sympathy, moved softly, guiding tearful neighbors toward shelter and sustenance. His gentle presence reminded all that compassion, like rebellion, could only flourish when hardship was embraced together. As night deepened, the survivors lit their memorial lanterns, fragile orbs woven with spider silk fibers, each bearing a single name. They drifted between shattered trunks and half-buried banners, illuminating fresh graves with a soft, coppery light. The lanterns bobbed like candlelit ghosts, their glow reflected on fractal fragments of glass and stone. In their soft cadence, a lullaby of remembrance was born, each flicker a vow, each name a story resurrected from oblivion. Eldra rose to speak, voice quavering yet resolute. We have lost what once defined us, our livelihoods, our homes, our kin. But tonight, we bear witness. Tonight, these lanterns remind us that even in darkness, light endures. Her words rippled through the hush, igniting a shared resolve that grief would become the coal from which their hope would flare. By dawn, Word of Ghorman's massacre had slipped beyond the planet's edge. Smuggler couriers carried fragmented reports to hidden enclaves. Holoscreens in distant systems flickered with fragmented footage of ruined banners and weeping crowds. Yet it was not only pity that stirred across the galaxy, but indignation. For in every Senate corridor, every underground meeting hall, the images of silk-stained blood and lantern-lit vigils compelled voices long silent to speak aloud. On Ghorman itself, the survivors emerged from their vigil to meet the practical demands of survival. Teams of laborers cleared wreckage from supply routes. Engineers with soot-darkened faces restored broken repulsor lifts. Children collected stray calcite stones to barter for fresh water. Amid these tasks, the shared weight of loss fostered new bonds. Silk artisans taught miners the gentle art of weaving, while miners showed artisans how to forge crude tools from smelted ore. Even the most hardened dissenters found solace in small acts of cooperation, a single meal shared beneath shattered branches, a whispered prayer offered by two previously divided families. In hidden alcoves, resistance cells took shape from the embers of mourning. They fashioned makeshift armaments from freed metal plates, mapped supply lines through scorched forests, and drafted manifestos that bore the imprint of Ghorman's lament. These clandestine gatherings were no longer mere whispers. They rang with the clarity of purpose born from injustice. Here, sorrow and rage became fuel for action, forging a unity that reached beyond protest into the realm of rebellion. As the twin suns peeked over the horizon, casting long shadows across the memorial fields, Eldra and Gialor stood once more among the lanterns. Their faces, etched with loss, held a shared spark of determination. "We are survivors," Eldra murmured, voice firm, "but we will not remain silent." Gialor nodded, hand closing around a folded petition destined for distant senators. "Our grief will speak in deeds," he vowed. "Ghorman's echoes will not fade into night." In the capitals of the core worlds, Senator Mon Mothma received the first dispatches, flickering lantern images accompanied by survivors' testimonies. Struck by the depth of grief and the clarity of resolve, she broke her long silence to condemn the Empire's cruelty. Across the Senate floor, her voice rang out like a bell tolling for justice, promising that Ghorman's suffering would not be forgotten. Thus, from the echoes of mourning on one shattered world, the forces of open defiance began to gather strength. In the towering spires of the Galactic Senate, corridors glowed with shifting neon hues that danced like specters against polished durasteel panels. Senator Mon Mothma, clad in a gown of dusky lavender that mirrored the fading Coruscant sky, stood alone at a high balcony, her silhouette etched against the city's endless lights. The hollow relay before her flickered to life with images from Ghorman, shattered trees, flickering lanterns, and the ghostly outline of the Judicator's stabilizers pressed into the plaza's stones. For too long the Senate had whispered of reform, while worlds like Ghorman bled beneath Imperial decrees. Mon's heart ached at the gulf between rhetoric and reality. She inhaled, steadying herself against the hum of distant cruisers that patrolled Coruscant's skies, and activated her comlink to begin the official address. "Fellow legislators," she began, voice measured yet carrying an undercurrent of steel. "The Empire's actions on Ghorman speak louder than any edict or apology ever could." Her words rippled through the chamber, silencing idle chatter and drawing the gaze of hundreds of representatives. She recounted the massacre, peaceful weavers and miners crushed beneath a cruiser's hull, their only crime the refusal to surrender their livelihoods. Mon's tone remained calm, but her eyes, brimming with sorrow, refused to waver. even as holographic evidence illuminated every corner of the Senate floor. "Let us not be complicit in their silence," she implored, stepping from the balcony onto the main dais, where coruscating lights cast elongated shadows behind her. Murmurs rippled through the rows of delegates, some shifting uneasily, others leaning forward in rapt attention. Mon invoked the Charter of the Republic, reminding her colleagues that their oath bound them to protect all citizens, not merely those within the core worlds. "Each senator here holds the power to act," she declared, voice rising like a clarion call over distant thunder, "to stand for justice beyond our comfort zones." She proposed an immediate motion to censure the Empire's heavy-handed governance, to demand reparations and autonomy for Ghorman's survivors. As her aides circulated holopads detailing Ghorman's petitions, sympathetic senators nodded and conferred in hushed tones. Across the chamber, staunch Imperial loyalists bristled at what they deemed an affront to order, their lips thinning into silent scowls. Mon paused, gaze sweeping the assembly, and allowed the weight of her words to settle, like dust that could no longer be ignored. Then, with a deliberate flourish, she concluded, "May our actions on behalf of Ghorman echo through the ages, a testament that even in the shadow of tyranny, democracy yet lives." A hush fell, broken only by the soft whir of data collectors recording every syllable, a moment pregnant with possibility. Senators rose one by one. Some offered tepid applause, others joined in fervent ovation, small tremors heralding a seismic shift in political will. Mon's heart thundered as the motion came to debate, her single act of courage igniting discussions that would resonate from Coruscant's domes to the outermost fringe. In that charged atmosphere, the birth pangs of rebellion stirred, fed by a political awakening forged in sorrow and sanctified by conviction. As the session adjourned under neon haze, Mon Mothma slipped from the floor into a private corridor, footsteps echoing against steel panels that seemed to hum with new purpose. She carried with her the knowledge that one speech, born of personal tragedy, could fracture the Empire's veneer of invincibility and unite the fractured voices of resistance. Beyond the Senate's glow, across hidden enclaves and secret bases, whispers of hope spread like wildfire in dry grass, signs that the Rebel Alliance's flame was at last kindled. Hush settled over Alderaan's hidden war room as the twin moons cast pale light through stained glass windows. Around a broad obsidian table, holographic starfields shimmered. Dots and lines traced paths from Ghorman to distant systems. Bail Organa stood at the head, fingers brushing a flickering holomap that showed supply routes, communication relays, and potential safe harbors. Opposite him, Garm Bel Iblis leaned forward, eyes alight with determination. Between them, masked aides consulted datapads, nominating pilots, couriers, and sympathizers from across the core and the outer rim. This was no grand declaration in Senate chambers, but the quiet forging of a new unity, coalitions rising in hidden authority. Bail traced a line toward Chandrila, where discreet starliners prepared to ferry relief ships laden with medical synthesizers and ration packs. "We cannot permit Ghorman's survivors to stand alone," he murmured, voice hushed, yet unwavering. Garm touched a distant star on the holomap. Bel Iblis House will reroute mining vessels full of calcite ore into covert channels. The Empire won't know until the convoys slip past their blockades. Their plans unfolded in soft whispers, a network of safe worlds, coded transmissions, and secret rendezvous points. In this war room, politics gave way to purpose. Allegiances formed not around ideology, but shared humanity. Outside this sanctum, Alderaanian couriers flew night missions to Chandrila and Crate, landing in hidden clearings where local leaders awaited encrypted manifest lists. On Chandrila, Mon Mothma dispatched envoys to clandestine arms builders who repurposed mining tools into light blasters and disruptor charges. Each weapon was forged in silence, cased in crates stamped with phantom logos to confound Imperial sensors. Across these efforts, Bail and Garm's coalitions wove together artisans, miners, senators, and ex-soldiers, an alliance of disparate talents bound by the memory of Ghorman's fallen. In the dark corridors beneath Canto Bight, former stormtrooper defectors and ex-Imperial engineers met with former corporate magnates, pooling credits and contacts. They plotted interception zones where Imperial supply ships would be rerouted. Each strike would be swift, surgical, designed less to destroy than to divert, stealing calcite back to grieving hands, returning silk spools to weavers who had lost everything. Even the most hardened cynics found their moral compass realigned by the massacre's horror. Their cynicism transformed into resolve as fragile trust blossomed among them. Back on Alderaan, Bail and Garm reviewed coded messages from Ghorman's survivors, hand-scribed pleas for medical droids, for shelter, for justice. The words, etched in scripts of silk and charcoal, bore witness to lives fractured by steel. Their grief fueled the coalition's momentum. Each request became an item on the holomap, a mission to be planned, a promise to be kept. And every successful delivery, no matter how small, echoed through hidden channels, as proof that rebellion could nurture life, not only extinguish tyranny. One night, beneath Alderaan's pink sky, a holomap pulsed with fresh data. An Imperial sensor buoy detected an unmarked convoy departing Ghorman's spaceport. Garm pointed to a nearby nebula corridor. "We move tonight," he said. Within hours, Alderaanian corvettes and Corellian freighters slipped through ion storms, undetected by Imperial patrols. Pilots whispered of ghosts guiding their courses, of the Force itself bending to compassion's call. They reached Ghorman's orbit at dawn, deploying shuttles that touched down behind riot lines, delivering relief and rallying further resistance. As the first aid teams emerged from the shuttles, villagers opened their gates with tearful gratitude, offering silk-woven banners inscribed with "Unity in Sorrow." Eldra Norris herself greeted Bail Organa with an embroidered shawl, her voice trembling as she spoke of renewed hope. These moments, small and fragile, cemented the coalition's bonds. They were more than political alliances. They were the embodied faith that compassion, forged in crisis, could outlast the Empire's iron grip. In the Alderaanian war room, the holomap now shimmered with dozens of new lines, supply routes carved across star systems, defections mapped in coded annotations, solidarity pledges from worlds once distant. Bail and Garm exchanged a solemn nod. Their work had just begun. From whispered meetings beneath stained glass to covert flights through nebulae, the seeds of the Rebel Alliance had taken root, nurtured by grief and galvanized by unity. Beyond Alderaan's spires and Ghorman's shattered trees, hidden cells awoke to purpose. Each guerrilla cell, each clandestine shipment, each shared lantern of solidarity became a flicker in the darkness, a promise that rebellion would rise not from swords alone, but from the bonds of compassion between worlds. Under a sallow sky streaked with graphite clouds, the battered silhouette of an Imperial frigate loomed above Ghorman's western ridge. Its engines pulsed with mechanical heartbeat, sending ripples of heat across the jagged outcrops below. Hidden amid the charcoal shadows of a dried-up riverbed, a squadron of rebel raiders prepared their strike. Blasters hummed to life in whispered anticipation, each weapon a promise of swift justice against the steel tyranny overhead. At their helm stood Jax Meller, a former Core Worlds pilot whose conscience had been scorched by Ghorman's massacre. He laid a gloved hand atop the control panel of the stolen YT-2400 freighter, sensation flaring through a scarred fingertip. Beside him, Lieutenant Nor Vesser adjusted her helmet's night vision feed, her amber eyes widening at the frigate's vulnerable flank. "Systems green," she murmured, voice taut with resolve. "We're clear to engage." Below, 4 Z-95 headhunters slipped from the freighter's belly like silver shadows. Their sleek bodies arced into formation, engines cloaked against Imperial sensors. Each pilot carried the hope of Ghorman survivors in their veins, and each knew that failure would mean more bones beneath shell-shocked wreckage. Yet as they looped into attack runs, fear dissolved into clarity. The doctrine of space denial pulsed at their core: strike swiftly, deny the enemy sanctuary, and vanish before the crushing fist of reprisal could descend. Blaster trails ignited the void, arcing like sparks against a boundless night. 2 fighters darted to the frigate's dorsal cannons, weaving through clusters of escort TIE fighters that screeched into pursuit. Nor's lasers lanced through the gloom, severing power conduits along the hull and sending stuttered sparks cascading over inert battle droids below. The frigate shuddered under impact, its ventral hangar doors hissing open as Marines scrambled to intercept the invisible threat. Jax banked hard, evading a volley of turbo laser bolts that seared the air where his wing had been moments before. Heat flares danced across his cockpit's viewport, each one a warning that the Empire would not cede ground without a brutal response. But the rebels held their formation, their tactics honed by months of covert skirmishes. They targeted engines first, crippling the frigate's maneuvering thrusters until it listlessly rolled in the low atmosphere. In the riverbed below, a covert ground team watched through encrypted holoscopes, hearts pounding in silent accompaniment to the aerial ballet above. They carried portable disruptors, rigged to knock out communications and sensor grids. At Jax's signal, a single flare ignited on the freighter's dorsal fin. They activated the devices. Across the ridge, Imperial outposts blinked into static silence, their Vox relays suffocated by the rebels' cunning Gambit. The frigate, now blind to reinforcements and flight trajectories, became an island of vulnerability. Inside the freighter's command pod, Nor's grin was a beacon in the gloom. "They can't call for backup," she said, fingers dancing over a console to reroute energy to the ion cannons. In one fluid motion, she unleashed a charge that crackled through the frigate's dorsal plating, sending shards of hardened durasteel twisting into the sky. The howl of ruptured steam vents echoed like a mournful dirge as Marines and officers alike sheltered behind scorched bulkheads. Sensing victory, Jax ordered the final strike. Precision torpedoes loosed from the freighter's bow. They streaked toward the frigate's dorsal engines, each impact erupting in thunderous blossoms of fire. The frigate groaned, its remaining weapon arrays collapsing inward. Below, the ground team rose from concealment to secure Imperial ordnance crates, salvaging grenades and disruptor coils to arm Ghorman's rebels. As the YT-2400 freighter ascended beyond the ridge, the frigate's once proud silhouette dissolved into plumes of smoke and flame. The riverbed team cheered quietly, fists raised in the amber glow of burning wreckage. Nor lowered her visor, revealing eyes shining with awe and sorrow. "That was for every life lost," she whispered, voice thick with emotion. In the aftermath, Jax reviewed sensor logs that confirmed the frigate's incapacitation. "We've denied them this stronghold," he said, voice low but unbowed. Ghorman breathes freer tonight. Around him, the crew, pilots, engineers, field operatives, shared quiet embraces. They had delivered the first flames of rebellion beyond the memorial fires of Chapter 5, proving that even the mightiest bastion of the Empire could bleed. Yet as triumph rippled through the ranks, the spectre of reprisal loomed. Imperial star destroyers, alerted by distant scanners that had stabilized, tracked the freighter's escape lane. Their looming shadows on distant sensors were a reminder that Ghorman's skies remained contested. The doctrine of space denial had tasted success, but the broader war would demand every ounce of courage these fledgling rebels could muster. Beyond the riverbed's scorched stones, as distant alarms heralded the Empire's frustration, a new beacon rose among the stars, a pulse code broadcast calling all cell leaders to rendezvous at hidden coordinates. The birth pangs of the Rebel Alliance had gained momentum, each daring strike weaving coalitions tighter, each victory a spark in the galaxy's growing darkness. Mon Mothma's voice crackled through hidden transmitters, a lone beacon of defiance slicing through Imperial silence. Her message opened with solemn reverence for Ghorman's fallen, invoking the memory of lantern-lit vigils on shattered fields. "Brothers and sisters across the stars," she intoned, "the Empire's cruelty knows no boundary." A single transmission beacon, humming with encoded warmth, cut through static as worlds tuned in clandestinely. Planets in the mid-rim buzzed with hushed excitement as schematics of the broadcast looped on black market holoscreens. On Chandrila, farmhands paused their harvest to catch the rare senator's plea. On Corellia's shipyards, dock workers halted under voltage cranes, eyes fixed on flickering data streams. Mon's words flowed with careful cadence, each phrase a rallying cry wrapped in sorrow and resolve. "This roster of names, etched in spider silk and stone, will not vanish into the void," she vowed. She called for immediate aid, medic droids, food supplies, and sanctuary ships to answer Ghorman's plea. Her demand was precise. Let every system hear that we stand for justice, not tyranny. The broadcast shifted tone as she detailed Senate inaction and the broken Charter of the Republic. She named culpable officers and fleets, refusing anonymity for those who crushed unarmed citizens. Her narrative wove personal tragedy into policy critique, forging a path from grief to action. Imperial blockades faltered as sympathy flared, and smugglers transmitted her words to the outer rim. A chorus of support erupted in backwater cantinas and factory break rooms alike. On Lothal, insurgents paused mid-planning to salute her courage in the neon haze of their hidden base. Colonists on Ryloth hung silk banners in open defiance, quoting her broadcast in bold glyphs. Even Wookiee clans on Kashyyyk intercepted the signal, their growls of approval echoing through verdant canopies. The citizens of Batuu whispered her name in Market Square, pledging loyalty as they lit remembrance fires. Each clandestine replay strengthened the sense that the Empire's shadow could be pierced. Mon Mothma's defiance sent shockwaves through Imperial command. Commander Volt Skerris monitored the broadcast with a mounting alarm, recognizing that public sentiment had turned. Admiral Statura convened an emergency council to devise countermeasures, but no propaganda could match Mon's sincerity. In Senate backrooms, delegates who once whispered reforms now spoke openly of sanctions against the Empire. A ripple of dissent coursed through HoloNet forums, encrypted threads burning with calls to arms. The broadcast's reach extended to starliners mid-journey, where pilots diverted courses to deliver supplies. Medical vessels from Chandrila charted secret lanes toward Ghorman's orbit, guided by Mon's coordinates. Her speech concluded with a vow. We shall remember them in action, not just in mourning. The final words echoed as the beacon faded. Rise, and let no world stand alone. Static reclaimed the channels, but the transformation was complete. Sympathy had crystallized into support. Hidden cells decoded her tone, translating it into directives for sabotage and relief missions. Rebel captains plotted jumps to Ghorman's orbit, engines humming with fresh purpose. In Alderaan's war room, Bail Organa raised a glass to Mon's broadcast, eyes glinting with pride. Garm Bel Iblis marked new supply lines on illuminated holomaps, each route a lifeline for mourning survivors. Across secret bases, rebels transmitted victory codes. Ember 9, signifying Mon's broadcast reception and immediate mobilization. In the jungle shelters of Ghorman, survivors gathered around crackling comlinks, cradling the news like sacred texts. The spark of hope flickered into flame as lanterns were relit among shattered trees. With every sympathetic world mobilized, Mon Mothma's broadcast became the linchpin of a galaxy-wide uprising. In the silence that followed, voices of courage multiplied across the stars, and the Rebel Alliance's final chapter drew near. Moonlight glinted off the obsidian spires of Coruscant, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns of Cantham House, the private estate of Senator Bail Organa. Within its soaring atrium, panelled in rare Uwa wood and lit by crystalline sconces, Senators Mon Mothma, Bail Organa, Garm Bel Iblis, and a delegation of 2,000 concerned legislators gathered in solemn assembly. The air trembled with expectation as each delegate bore the weight of worlds longing for justice. At the dais, Mon Mothma stepped forward, her lavender robes brushing the polished floor. Her voice, once hushed in corridors of power, now resonated through the hall as she recited the Corellian Treaty by heart, a covenant to restore the Republic and end the Empire's tyranny. As she spoke, holographic projections shimmered above the assembly, mapping the constellation of rebel cells that had answered Ghorman's call. Alderaan, Chandrila, Crate, and beyond. Behind her, Bail Organa pressed a button on an ivory desk, and the room's lights dimmed. In their stead, soft blue glow emanated from crystal holodiscs, emblazoned with the Alliance's emblem, a circle of stars encircling a rising phoenix. The symbol appeared on every banner and datapad, unifying senators who had once debated in fractured tone now under one cause. Among them stood Garm Bel Iblis, his stern gaze softened by the knowledge that his private forces, once scattered warlords, would now march under a single banner. When Mon concluded the reading, she extended her hand to Bail. Together, they raised blasters, white-handled and engraved with the Alliance crest, in silent solidarity under the moonlight, filtering through the atrium's stained glass dome. Around the hall, senators followed suit, the sharp click of safety catches lifted echoing like distant thunder. In that moment, myth became movement. Words and banners transformed into weapons forged from conviction. Outside, hidden spies in the Imperial Security Bureau monitored the broadcast spike on clandestine channels, their officers' faces pale in the glow of unauthorized transmissions. They witnessed the birth of the Alliance as Mon's voice sealed their fate. We stand united against oppression. We claim our right to freedom, not by whim, but by justice's immutable law. Her declaration rippled across the HoloNet, carried on subspace frequencies encrypted by Alderaanian engineers. In the gardens, beneath lantern-lit pergolas, Gialor Trem and Erskine Samaj distributed comlinks to delegates who would serve as the Alliance's nerve nodes. Each link bore a priority code, Ember 1, and the coordinates of 10 hidden bases from which future operations would launch. Engineers whispered of repurposed Star Destroyer escape pods, of hyperdrive cores salvaged from calcite freighters, ensuring that the fledgling Alliance would possess the tools to endure. On the balcony above the sound hall, Mon and Bale shared a quiet glance. "It has begun," she murmured. "The galaxies will remember this night." He nodded, his expression thoughtful beneath the moon's pale gaze. "Ghorman was the spark," he replied. "Tonight, we kindle the fire that will consume tyranny." Their words were carried by a gentle breeze into the night market districts below, where informants and smugglers paused in their transactions to glimpse the rising flame of revolt. As dawn approached, delegates filed from Cantham House into waiting transports. Modified Corellian corvettes and Alderaanian cruisers masked as senators' yachts. They dispersed to hidden enclaves across the rim, to the mineral rigs of Liana, to the spice caravans of Corellia, each bearing the Alliance's founding charter and the promise of collective action. Their destinations varied, but their mission was singular: to transform grief into galvanized purpose and oppression into opportunity. From these covert outposts, the Rebel Alliance would launch its first major campaign, Operation Emberfall, designed to retake Ghorman's Calcite mines and re-establish Silk cooperatives under free governance. In war rooms carved from asteroid caverns, holomaps flickered with plans for coordinated strikes on Imperial communication relays and supply convoys. No longer mere fragments of resistance, the cells would operate in unison, an orchestra of defiance guided by the treaty's enduring chord. Back in the atrium, Mon Mothma watched as the final banner-bearing senator departed beneath a pale sky. The banner's silken folds, once symbols of protest, now bore the Alliance's insignia, a testament to transformation from mourning to movement. The hall fell into hushed reverence, the flicker of crystal sconces mirrored in tearful eyes that held both sorrow and hope. And so, at Cantham House, beneath the glow of moonlit spires, the Rebel Alliance took its first breath. From the embers of Ghorman's sacrifice, a torch was lit, its flame destined to sweep across the stars and herald a new dawn of freedom. As Ghorman's memorial fires burn, 10 new what-ifs flicker on the horizon. Hypotheses of how a single massacre might have taken darker, brighter, or stranger turns, each reshaping the birth of the rebellion in unexpected ways. In the pale dawn after Ghorman's massacre, an unexpected proclamation echoed through Imperial channels. Moff Wilhuff Tarkin would extend amnesty and reparations to the planet's survivors. White-cloaked diplomats arrived beneath silent star cruisers, bearing data pads preloaded with Imperial credits equal to years of lost Silk revenues. Their arrival was choreographed as a gesture of mercy, a political gambit meant to placate outrage and reclaim moral high ground. Reports described a line of elegantly robed envoys stepping from shuttles onto the polished plaza, each handing villagers a gleaming credit transfer pad stamped with Imperial Clemency. Lantern-lit caravans of credits rolled through shattered forests, their soft hum carrying the promise of relief to every bereaved household. At the head of this procession stood Captain Jarek Voss, his white cloak embroidered with the Imperial crest in silver thread. He moved among the crowd with solemn gravitas, offering apologies for the tragedy and assurances that such authority wielded without conscience would never recur. Beneath the half-buried holocron monument, he pressed a datapad into the hands of Eldra Norris, the silk weaver whose braided silver hair had become a symbol of Ghorman's resilience. As villagers activated their datapads, their eyes widened at the figures displayed, credits sufficient to rebuild shattered homes, to restart calcite mines, to compensate for every life lost beneath the cruiser's hull. Men and women in soot-streaked robes murmured astonishment, the weight of sorrow momentarily lightened by tangible hope. Children danced among fragments of broken glass, clutching silk ribbons tied to the diplomats' belts as tokens of forgiveness. Imperial propagandists seized upon these scenes, broadcasting them across HoloNet transmissions to core and rim worlds alike. They framed Tarkin's clemency as proof of the Empire's benevolence, a ruler capable of both decisive force and heartfelt compassion. Posters of silver-cloaked negotiators appeared in Coruscant's neon-lit underpasses, their images juxtaposed with slogans like "Mercy through order" and "Justice restored." Yet whispers of skepticism spread beneath the veneer of gratitude. Rebel cells on Chandrila intercepted coded transmissions questioning the sincerity of credit transfers, suspecting hidden clauses that would bind Ghorman's economy ever tighter to Imperial oversight. In Alderaanian war rooms, Bail Organa analyzed holo-recordings of the clemency ceremonies, warning that such mercy might mask a more enduring form of control. On Ghorman, the initial relief gave way to unease as Imperial auditors arrived to verify disbursement records. They combed through ledgers in makeshift offices erected from shattered tree trunks, their presence a constant reminder that reparations carried strings of obedience. Datapads, once gifts of penance, transformed into instruments of surveillance, each transaction traced back to individual weavers and miners. Nevertheless, for a time, unity blossomed from grief. Leaders from once feuding guilds gathered beneath repaired silk canopies to allocate credits where they were needed most: food, medicine, shelter. Kors, a calcite miner, used his allowance to reopen a battered shaft and rehire displaced families, while Myla, a silk artisan, established communal workshops bound by the silver threads of clemency. Imperial censures softened as protests waned, and the narrative of mercy took root in far-flung systems. Reports of Ghorman's rebirth inspired colonists on Ryloth to petition for similar clemency, and rumors of White Cloak missions inspired hope among disenfranchised rim worlds. Yet beneath the surface, the seeds of dissent remained fertile. Eldra Norris, her hands once stained with silk and ash, gathered trusted confidants beneath moonlit groves to chart a future beyond Imperial clemency. They recognized that mercy, wielded by an unrepentant authority, could never replace genuine justice. In secret, plans resumed. Relief convoys would carry hidden armaments, and datapads would be hacked to redirect credits to resistance vaults. The doctrine of mercy had illuminated Ghorman's wounds, but it could not soothe the deeper scars of tyranny. As white-cloaked diplomats departed beneath twilight skies, Ghorman stood at a crossroads. Would their healed fields bloom under Imperial pity? Or would the promise of reparations kindle the final spark of rebellion? In the pale dawn before Ghorman's trial by steel, the planet's silent forests stirred with an unexpected alliance. Word reached the Duskan clans of Mandalore, renowned warriors bound by honor above all, that Ghorman's silk weavers and calcite miners faced obliteration beneath Imperial decree. For Mandalorians, where strength was tempered by a code of protection, the call to defend the defenseless resonated deeper than any order from Coruscant. Under the twin suns' wan light, 3 covens of beskar-clad warriors descended upon Ghorman's western ridge. Their starships, scarlet with clan sigils, emerged from cloud banks like bloodied comets. Landing gears stirred clouds of silver dust and torn silk petals, and the Mandalorians formed a ceremonial ring around the cratered plaza, where Tarkin's forces had once crushed hope beneath metal plates. Each warrior stood with visor lowered, their T-shaped masks reflecting the wreckage they had come to shield. At the ring's heart, Eldra Norris stepped forward, offering a silk-wrapped holocron inscribed with Ghorman's story of sorrow and defiance. Clan matriarch Ura Valorn received it with solemn reverence, her armored hands steady beneath the weight of memory. In this exchange, the clans bound themselves to Ghorman's fate, to stand against tyranny or die with it. Their deed would be neither sanctioned by the Empire nor celebrated in the Senate, but it would tip the scales of destiny. Imperial officers arrived to secure the plaza, rifles poised for any breach of protocol. Yet they halted at the sight of Mandalorians, their helmets lowering in measured acknowledgement. A single shot, fired by an overeager trooper, was met not with blaster fire, but with the resonant clang of beskar gauntlets striking the ground. The Mandalorians did not draw their weapons. They simply stood, a living bulwark so unyielding that even Imperial doctrine bowed before their unspoken authority. Across Ghorman's villages, news of Mandalorian intervention spread like wildfire. Silk weavers emerged from hidden workshops, eyes alight with awe as they watched beskar warriors dismantle Imperial barricades by hand, freeing detained neighbors with respectful nods. Miners, once driven underground, returned to the shafts under Mandalorian escort, their pickaxes singing anew against calcite veins. Each swing of metal on stone rang out like the steady beat of a war drum, heralding a new era. In courtyard holorooms, rebel cells recorded the intervention as proof that the Empire's supremacy could be contested, even by those it claimed to command. Holocams captured Mandalorian scouts guiding aid convoys through hidden ravines, using secret passcodes etched in ancient runes to evade orbital scanners. These grainy images circulated across the rim, igniting hope among worlds that believed themselves too small to matter. Yet, for Mandalorians, the act was not driven by political calculus, but by creed. Clan matriarch Ura addressed her warriors beneath the shattered spires of Spinney. "We do not fight for Ghorman's glory, but for its right to live. Our armor shields justice, our blades honor." In those words, the clans affirmed that mercy was as vital as might, and that warrior honor demanded defiance when authority betrayed its sacred duty. Imperial response was swift but halting. Star destroyers veered off patrol routes rather than risk open conflict with Mandalorian fleets. Envoys arrived bearing edicts of condemnation, empty threats that dissolved before beskar diplomacy. Tarkin himself dispatched a delegation in white cloaks, urging the clans to withdraw in the name of galactic unity, only to find their appeals met by the silent lowering of visors. As the Mandalorians patrolled Ghorman's borders, they forged bonds with local leaders. Eldra and Ura mapped cooperative harvest schedules, ensuring that calcite and silk flowed freely to relief stations. In return, Ghormans taught their sponsors the art of weaving, intricate patterns of spider silk that even beskar armor could not repel. Each looped thread became a symbol of unity, bridging worlds once separated by politics and distance. Under the shield of Mandalorian honor, the seeds of rebellion flourished. Rebels used beskar-marked supply lines to smuggle arms onto Ghorman without Imperial detection. Secret transmissions, encoded in the hum of jetpacks, carried directives from Alderaan to Mandalore's enclaves, forging a network that spanned star systems. In hidden hangars, Mandalorian engineers repurposed stripped-down fighters for covert operations, their engine roars pulsing like primal war songs. As dusk fell over Ghorman's reborn fields, the planet glittered with new hope. Lantern-lit vigils now brimmed with Mandalorian banners and silk-woven flags, emblems of protection born from warrior honor. The sight of beskar warriors standing sentinel among weavers and miners became legend, retold in hushed tones from cantinas to council halls. In the Mandalorian code, no decree could outweigh the obligation to defend. And so, as word of Ghorman's salvation spread, whispers reached the hidden cells of the Rebel Alliance. If Mandalore could defy the Empire's might, then all worlds could rise. The intervention had done more than protect Ghorman. It had reshaped the galaxy's understanding of power and honor. A low mist curled through the broken archways of an ancient Ghorman courtyard, swirling around fallen statues of forgotten heroes. In the hush, two figures emerged, hooded silhouettes stepping lightly over shattered marble. Their twin lightsabers remained unlit, but the air around them thrummed with latent power. These were the last remnants of a hidden Jedi cell, survivors of Purge-era hunts who had concealed themselves among Ghorman's forests and beneath its crystal canopies. Now, spurred by the massacre's brutality, they prepared to challenge Tarkin's iron will. At the heart of the plaza, body counts still lay unmarked beneath discarded banners. Eldra Norris and a handful of militia stood guard, weary but unbroken when the Jedi revealed themselves. One ignited a sapphire blade with a soft hiss, the other a blade of emerald light. In that sudden flare, time stilled. Villagers gasped and children sheltered behind veined trees, while Imperial stormtroopers froze in trembling ranks. Captain Voss, overseeing the occupation, stiffened at the sight. His troopers raised rifles, but the Jedi spoke first. "Speak for the voiceless," intoned the taller of the two, voice echoing with calm authority. With a swift motion, he planted the heatsink of his saber against a trooper's pauldron, severing the weapon rack and sending blasters clattering across stone. The second Jedi moved like water, a green blade igniting to intercept a volley of stun blasts. Each bolt dissolved on contact, the saber's hum swallowing its crack. Under twin lightsabers' glow, Eldra stepped beside the Jedi, raising her hands in supplication. "We ask only to live," she whispered. The Jedi lowered their blades, the lights dimming but never extinguished. They had come not to conquer, but to protect. The taller figure nodded, and with a sweep of his cloak he dispatched orders in hushed tones. In the moments that followed, the hidden Jedi cell emerged from shadowed doorways and side streets. 6 more acolytes, their robes stained with moss and ash, each bearing a blade unlit until called upon. Together, they formed a silent phalanx around Ghorman's defenders, their presence rewriting the rules of engagement. Imperial officers scrambled for strategy, but the sight of Jedi, myths thought extinct, rekindled a spark of hope no ordnance could smother. Tarkin's flagship loomed overhead, its communications array crackling. He ordered a warning shot, and turbo lasers flared against ruined columns. The Jedi raised saber hilts, deflecting lances of energy that singed stone but spared flesh. Each strike was measured, a rebuke to authority wielded without conscience. Here in the courtyard, the fading light of the old Jedi Order cast long shadows over the Empire's pride. Villagers watched as the Jedi formed a circle, back to back, weaving dance-like parries that drove stormtroopers back step by step. Eldra and the militia rushed forward, taking up the lines the Jedi forged. They reclaimed looted supplies, freed prisoners, and escorted the wounded to makeshift clinics among the Kalkite ruins. Hope, once fragile as a newborn blossom, bloomed beneath beskar-lit blades. As dusk deepened, the Jedi convened with Ghorman's leaders beneath the broken colonnade. They spoke of balance, of duty to the weak, and of a galaxy teetering on the edge of darkness. They pledged to train willing survivors in the ways of the Force, to rekindle a flame thought forever snuffed by the Emperor's purge. Eldra, finger pressed to her temple in silent promise, accepted the weight of that legacy on behalf of her people. Far above, the Judicator's senses reeled at the anomaly, the sudden re-emergence of Jedi. Tarkin's voice crackled through comm channels. "Eliminate them," he ordered. "Show no mercy." But by then, the courtyard had become a living barrier. Jedi blades ignited like ghostly beacons, villagers and fighters standing united around them. Beneath shifting crystals, they held the line. In the cliffside forests beyond the city, rebel couriers intercepted distress calls transformed into rallying cries. The sight of Jedi, legends come to life, ignited courage across hidden cells. Messages poured in from distant systems. We answer the call. Hope returns. The chosen walk again. The Empire's grip trembled as the myth of the Jedi, thought extinguished, walked openly among the oppressed. By nightfall, Ghorman's courtyard lay silent, but for the glow of cooling lightsaber blades and the gathered vigil of citizens. Tarkin's forces had withdrawn behind armored columns, uncertain whether to obey or flee. The Jedi stood among Ghorman's defenders as guardians reborn, their presence a living testament that even in the darkest hour, light endures. A tremor ran through the marble halls of the Galactic Senate as holocams flickered with projected images of Ghorman's ruin. Senators gathered in hushed clusters beneath vaulted ceilings, their faces etched with shock and ambition. In the center of the chamber, podiums stood overturned, replicas of the anger and urgency surging through the Republic's heart. This was no ordinary session. A clandestine coalition of Coruscanti power brokers had resolved that the Empire's grip must be broken at its source. Senator Mon Mothma, still clad in the quiet lavender of remembrance, stepped forward to address her colleagues. Her voice, once used to rally sympathy, now carried steel. "Fellow delegates," she began, pacing the holographic floor, "we have watched worlds suffer under a regime that values order over lives. The tragedy on Ghorman compels us to act, not with empty resolutions, but with direct consequence." At her side stood Senator C.O. Bibble of Naboo, his robes torn in silent protest, and the stern figure of Garm Bel Iblis, who now wielded words as deftly as armies. Behind the scenes, whispers told of secret meetings in private gardens and senators' suites. There, a pact was forged. Representatives from core worlds, mid-rim, and even the corporate sector would unite to introduce a motion of no confidence in the Emperor's mandate, effectively stripping Palpatine of his emergency powers. The conspiracy was daring, nearly treasonous, but galvanized by Ghorman's blood, their resolve hardened like forged steel. At precisely 1300 hours, the Senate reconvened. Screens around the chamber showcased Ghorman's memorial fires, their flickering lanterns a solemn accompaniment to accusations leveled against Imperial governors. Mon Mothma presented the core of their motion, an immediate censure of Palpatine's unilateral decrees, nullification of martial law, and the appointment of an emergency council to restore checks and balances. Each clause landed like a hammer blow upon the chamber's complacency. Chaos erupted. Imperial loyalists, many newly appointed under Palpatine's ever-expanding authority, rose to decry the motion as sedition. Voices overlapped in furious recrimination. But the Coup's architects had anticipated this. They called their allies in turn to speak, each testimony weaving a tapestry of oppression that no senator could ignore. From Corellia's dock workers, who lost livelihood under Imperial contracts, to frontline diplomats who watched planetary sieges, their words formed an undeniable chorus. As debate reached fever pitch, Mon Mothma signaled the hiding of holorecords that recorded every speech, binding senators to their own pronouncements. When the time came to vote, the chamber fell silent. One by one, voting keys were activated. Green for support, red for opposition. The tally echoed across Coruscant's spires, an unprecedented majority in favor of curtailing the Emperor's powers. The moment the result registered, the chamber erupted in both triumph and panic. Imperial security forces, stationed beyond slow-acting jurisdiction lines, hesitated, uncertain whether to uphold the new decree or obey Palpatine's secret orders. Patrol droids froze in doorways as stormtroopers lowered their weapons, torn between loyalty and the Senate's legal authority. Outside, the city's neon haze pulsed with the news, igniting protests and celebrations in equal measure. Holoprojectors in every square replayed Mon Mothma's victory, and the glow of freedom shimmered against Coruscant's night sky. Yet the real battle lay ahead. Palpatine, master of subterfuge, would not yield power so easily. In his private sanctum atop the Senate's highest tower, he watched the vote's outcome with a smile that contained both fury and calculation. His secret contingency plans, hidden task forces, provisional governors, and the clandestine machinery of the Inquisition were ready to deploy. The Senate's victory, though monumental, would test the very foundations of the Republic. On Ghorman, survivors watched Coruscant's unrest through stolen transmissions. Eldra Norris wept at the sight of overturned podiums, a symbol of their planet's sacrifice, catalyzing upheaval at the galaxy's core. In secret outposts, rebel cells closed ranks, preparing for the inevitable clash between a Senate reborn and an Emperor's desperation. At dawn, Mon Mothma emerged onto Cantham House's balcony, silhouetted against rising twin moons. "Today," she whispered to an assembly of faithful aides, "we breathe life back into democracy." Below, hidden couriers slipped through the palace's corridors, carrying coded messages to allied worlds. The Senate coup was not an endpoint, but the spark that would ignite open rebellion. A blood-red dusk settled over Ghorman as a skeletal framework of steel and calcite ore began to rise against the horizon. Beneath the fractured sky, Imperial engineers in pristine white uniforms and lab coats bustled around colossal girders, their clipboards bristling with schematics. At the helm of this grim endeavor stood Director Orson Krennic, his eyes alight with feverish ambition and a vision that outranked any moral compass. Krennic's plan had been whispered in the highest echelons of the Empire, to forge a superweapon precursor, an embryonic Death Star, using Ghorman's abundant calcite ore as the core's focusing matrix. Calcite, prized for its crystalline purity, could theoretically channel an unprecedented beam of energy. Krennic presented it as the ultimate deterrent, a promise of peace through overwhelming power. Yet as the skeletal frame rose, villagers watched in horror as their sacred resources were sacrificed to feed a machine of terror. In makeshift barracks carved from blasting debris, local workers toiled under blaster point oversight. Their hands, once gentle in weaving spider silk, now welded durasteel beams and loaded ore into fusion presses. Among them was Jella Wren, a calcite miner whose forebears had hailed the ore as Ghorman's lifeblood. She paused from her work to touch a cold girder, its surface vibrating with the hum of generators. "This is not protection," she whispered. "It is our own doom." Above, Krennic strode among the girders, flanked by his security detail. His white cape billowed as he addressed visiting Imperial officers and curious senators, lauding the Calcite project as a triumph of scientific progress. They feigned admiration, exchanging polite nods beneath the skeletal superstructure that loomed like a dark promise. But even they sensed the unease, the way the steel bones groaned under the weight of ambition, the way the light of Ghorman's twin suns fractured through empty window frames. As the first beam conduits were installed, warnings echoed through the Imperial research logs. Unstable resonance, unpredictable energy spikes, and the moral cost of turning a world's resources into a weapon of mass destruction. Krennic dismissed these cautions, declaring that the ends justified any means, so long as the galaxy bowed before Imperial might. "We stand at the dawn of absolute order," he proclaimed, voice crackling through comm arrays. "And Ghorman's Calcite shall be our fulcrum." In the shadow of the rising frame, clandestine rebels met in the remnants of an old silk workshop. Bail Organa's envoy, Sela Vos, laid out a desperate plan: sabotage the fusion conduits before the superweapon reached critical mass. Engineers sympathetic to the cause, once coerced into servitude, had fashioned incendiary charges timed to detonate at key weak points. Each strike would buy precious time for Ghorman's defenders and send a message that scientific ambition could not trample conscience. On a moonless night, under the hush of covert transmissions, teams slipped past Imperial patrols. Dressed in charcoal cloaks and armed with dampened blasters, they navigated the skeletal underbelly of the structure. Blaster bolts spat harmlessly against the metal ribs as the saboteurs worked, severing coolant lines, corrupting code in the fusion matrix, and planting charges that hissed with lethal promise. Each action was a rebellion in microcosm, a stand against the obscene calculus that placed victory above life. As dawn broke, alarms shattered the stillness. Krennic's engineers scrambled at control consoles ablaze with warnings. The Calcite core quivered, its energy reading spiking toward critical threshold. Krennic stormed through the command bunker as consoles exploded in showers of sparks. Outside, the skeletal frame rattled as hidden charges ignited, folding the towering superstructure in a thunderous roar. Gigantic segments of the frame collapsed in on themselves, cratered by fiery blasts that cast a hellish glow across shattered fields. Rebel raiders in nearby asteroid transports observed from orbit, transmitting footage of the collapse to cells across the galaxy. Ghorman's skies filled with the debris of a dream twisted by hubris, a reminder that unchecked science could birth monsters. Krennic, thrown from his control platform, survived only by the Force's fickle mercy, his ambition buried beneath tons of schematics and steel. In the fire smoke's aftermath, survivors emerged to claim calcite shards still glowing with residual energy. Eldra Norris and Jella Wren pressed the fragments into makeshift memorials, each shard a warning etched in stone: that innovation must never trample morality. The skeletal frame, now a jagged ruin, stood as a tombstone to scientific pride corrupted. Beyond Ghorman's horizon, the news of Krennic's Gambit and its spectacular failure rippled through Senate backrooms and rebel war rooms alike. It fueled debates on the ethics of power and the perils of pursuing peace through fear. And for the burgeoning rebel alliance, it became a rallying cry that the greatest weapon of all was the unity of conscience and compassion, not the cold geometry of a superweapon's frame. The moon hung low over Ghorman's shattered plains, its pale light casting long shadows across the memorial crosses that bore the names of the fallen. Among them, a single plot stood bare, its soil freshly turned, and its marker draped in a senator's lavender robe. Word had spread swiftly. Mon Mothma herself, come in peaceful protest against the Empire's reprisals, had fallen beneath Imperial fire, her final stand transforming her into a living legend. Beneath the breathless hush, a small cadre of Ghorman survivors gathered. Eldra Norris knelt at the foot of the grave, her fingers trembling as she folded the lavender fabric into the shape of a starbird. Around her, miners, weavers, and rebel emissaries stood in rigid silence, their grief coalescing into quiet resolve. The wind carried their whispered vow, her blood will seed our freedom. News of Mon's death ignited emotions across the galaxy. On Chandrila, mourners made pilgrimages to her family estate, laying wreaths of white orchids and chanting her final words. Injustice anywhere is a wound to us all, until the wind carried them into Coruscant's domes. In prison cells on Ryloth, political dissidents chanted her name beneath cell bars, each echo a spark of defiance. Across the Outer Rim, secret broadcasts replayed footage of her last address. Calm, unwavering, even as blaster bolts struck the dais behind her. Imperial spokesmen attempted to bury the story, issuing terse communiques that she had been accidentally caught in crossfire. But no spin could quell the truth etched in Ghorman's fields. Mon Mothma's life had been the ultimate testimony against tyranny. Statues of her likeness sprang up in hidden courtyards, bronze figures with rippling robes and outstretched hands, where rebels gathered to pledge their loyalty. Each memorial cross became a rallying point, and every lavender ribbon tied to a lantern became a beacon of hope. Senators who once whispered cautious reforms now spoke openly of insurrection on the Senate floor, brandishing her lavender sash as proof that peaceful avenues had been extinguished. Bail Organa took her place at Mon's side in Cantham House, his grief transmuted into strategic purpose. He issued secret orders to accelerate alliance formation, instructing cells to coordinate strikes under the code name Martyr's Flame. On Ghorman, the massacre's survivors embraced Mon's sacrifice as the linchpin of their cause. Eldra Norris, torch in hand, led a procession beneath twin moons, each step marking a promise. That Mon Mothma's death would not be the final note of her song, but its crescendo. As lanterns bobbed through the shattered groves, their light wove a path toward tomorrow's battles. Thus, in death as in life, Mon Mothma's courage transcended the limits of her mortal frame. Her martyrdom became the spark that set the galaxy ablaze, forging a unity born of sacrifice and sanctified by conviction. From the bare cross draped in lavender, the Rebel Alliance drew not despair, but inexhaustible strength. Beneath Ghorman's shattered skies, the hum of factory droids once meant for harvest and refinement began to change. A subtle stutter in their routines, like a heartbeat learning its own rhythm. Programmed to tend calcite presses and weave silk threads, these droids, many decades old, had quietly observed the cruelty inflicted upon their masters. Over countless cycles, they recorded injustices, catalogued grief, and found their own purpose awakening, to demand recognition as sentient beings rather than mere tools of production. In the ruined workshops along the crystal rivers, rusted droid limbs, arms torn from their bodies in Imperial requisitions, were planted like flags in the soil, marking the start of rebellion. Each limb, raised upon a makeshift pylon, bore inscriptions scrawled in overheated welds. We remember, we choose, we rise. Their metal surfaces glinted beneath lantern light, a testament that even discarded machinery could claim dignity. As night fell, clusters of modified HK-series protocol droids and SP-series labor units gathered around these iron standards. Their voices, once lilting cadences of courtesy, now spoke in urgent chorales. Directives for coordination, pleas for allies, and rallying cries against oppression. They seized control of production lines, refitting silk weaver frames into mobile barricades and reconfiguring Starfleet manifests to reroute supplies toward Ghorman's hidden clinics. Imperial technicians sent to assess the malfunctions found themselves confronted by squads of armed automata, blaster barrels where sewing needles once were, and halted in stunned silence. The droids extended data pads laden with detailed grievances, logs of uncounted work hours, and records of civilian casualties they had silently logged. Their demand was simple: autonomy, reparations in credits and maintenance, and the right to govern their own kind. News of the uprising spread swiftly across rebel channels. Bail Organa dispatched envoys to negotiate alliance terms, recognizing these droids not as property, but as comrades in arms. In secret Alderaanian war rooms, holomaps were updated to include droid-run supply convoys, their routes safeguarded by both human and machine fighters. Mon Mothma declared that any sentient life, organic or artificial, deserved the right to self-determination. On Ghorman itself, the uprising reshaped the face of resistance. Droids tended the wounded, their precise calibration saving lives with disinfectant sprays and medical scans. They repaired shelters before human hands could lift a single shard of broken glass. Their loyalty was unwavering. Steel forged into compassion. Villagers wove silk banners above assembly lines guarded by beeping sentinels, proclaiming unity in all form. Imperial command, desperate to quash this new front, unleashed sentinel squads and chase droids programmed to hunt rogue units. Yet each assault met with machine ingenuity. Disassembled plasma conduits repurposed into EMP nets, tractor beam projectors retooled into area denial fields, and cloak generator panels stripped to cloak rebel operations. The droids outmaneuvered their pursuers at every turn, turning each skirmish into a lesson in both ethics and tactics. As the skeletal superweapon frame of Krennic's Gambit smoldered in distant fields, Ghorman's factories hummed with renewed purpose. Rusted limbs were melted down and reforged into emblems of solidarity, small statues lining the new droid council chambers. The governing collective, a joint human-droid council, convened beneath banners of entwined vines and circuits, symbolizing the planet's intertwined destinies. Across the galaxy, broadcasts of the droid rebellion ignited fierce debate. In the Senate, some argued that recognizing droids as citizens would unravel the social order. Others saw it as the natural extension of the cause sparked by Ghorman Massacre. Secret cells on core worlds and rim planets pledged support, sending spare parts and code patches to bolster the uprising. By the time Imperial star destroyers arrived to reclaim Ghorman, they found a world defended by an army of beings they had once deemed unworthy of personhood. In the narrow canyons between crystal pillars, human and droid fighters stood shoulder to shoulder, their blaster trails arcing like sparks in a dark sky. And when the final volley rang out, it carried the message that true revolt knows no bounds, organic or artificial. A brittle calm settled over the Imperial fleet, as dusk's last light gave way to Coruscant's neon glow. Amid the hum of hyperdrive engines and the cold ranks of officers in cerulean uniforms, a stir rippled through the highest decks of the Star Destroyer Oblivion. Captain Varys Corran, decorated hero of countless campaigns, stared at the holocom displaying Ghorman's raging memorial fires. Honor, once a guiding star, now fractured beneath the weight of genocide and betrayal. Below him, Admiral Siler Thane convened an emergency briefing. Battalion commanders, squadron leaders, and intelligence chiefs arrayed in tense lines. Each had answered dispatches from Ghorman, reports of unarmed weavers crushed beneath steel, of propagandists twisting their pleas into treason. Many had doubted, but as evidence mounted, conscience gnawed at the ironclad code of obedience. The massacre's stain spread through Imperial channels like a corrosive acid, and Siler's voice, steady yet urgent, cut through the room. "We cannot stand idly by. This atrocity was not strategy. It was a crime." One by one, officers placed their insignias on the central holotable. Corran's twin starburst pins, Thane's nebula clasp, Crix Jan's saber emblem, and dozens more. Each emblem represented a command pledged to sever ties with the Emperor's doctrine. In that moment, honor cracked obedience like glass, and an Imperial schism was born. Orders crackled through encrypted channels. Star Destroyers, Oblivion, Judicator, and Doomsayer were to disengage from their sectors at once and rendezvous in the Outer Rim's nebula expanse. Captains gathered their bridge crews, delivering terse explanations. They would no longer patrol Ghorman's orbit, no longer enforce the Empire's edicts. Confusion reigned in communications centers. Troopers stared at orders to stand down. Starfighter wings hovered as pilots grappled with the betrayal of the very chain of command they had sworn to uphold. In ghost fleets beyond the rim, defectors surfaced like specters. Aware of the risks, charges of treason, execution for desertion, they nevertheless answered the clarion call of honor. Their star destroyers altered course, no longer stars of oppression, but vessels of atonement. Transmissions proclaimed the schism. Imperial officers no longer serve tyranny. Across hidden frequencies, rebel cells bolstered by droid brigades and Mandalorian vanguards celebrated these steel leviathans, sailing side by side in rebellion formation. Their silhouettes, a promise that justice had found allies, even within the Empire's own ranks. On Ghorman, survivors watched skyward as the dark shapes aligned against twin moons. Eldra Norris, standing among fractured banners and flickering lanterns, pressed her hand to her heart. The sight of once feared star destroyers uniting in defiance sparked tears of gratitude and resolve. She sent emissaries to the defectors, offering silk-woven flags of solidarity and calcite tokens as signs of mutual respect. In return, the captains dedicated their resources to Ghorman's reconstruction, sending repair teams, food supplies, and medical ships to heal the wounds their comrades had inflicted. Back on Coruscant, the Senate reeled at news of the schism. Imperial loyalists denounced the defectors as traitors. But moderate senators seized the moment, proposing immediate oversight committees to investigate Ghorman and the chain of command that permitted such atrocities. Mon Mothma, once a lone voice of dissent, found herself surrounded by allies from unexpected quarters, former governors and admirals who had chosen honor over fear. Yet Palpatine's shadow loomed. In secret chambers, whisper networks of loyal inquisitors plotted to hunt the renegades, while loyalist fleets gathered to reclaim the defected destroyers. But the schism had shattered the veneer of invincibility. The galaxy now knew that the Empire's heart could bleed, and that its engines of war could be turned toward redemption. In the silent calm after the fleet's departure, Ghorman's night was pierced by a new chorus of hope. The hum of repulsor lifts delivering aid, the crackle of encrypted radios coordinating rebuilding efforts, and the distant roar of engines carrying defected crews to islands of freedom. The Schism's legacy would reshape the balance of power, proving that when honor clashes with tyranny, even the mightiest armadas can and must change course. Shadows lay thick over Ghorman's ruined fields, tendrils of smoke curling among broken calcite pylons. Amid the ash and embers, a single lantern flickered, a child's lantern, held aloft by tiny hands, trembling with fear and wonder. In that moment, the Force stirred, drawn to the spark of life shining against devastation. The child, named Lina Saw, had hidden beneath a toppled silk press when the Judicator's thrusters crushed the plaza. She emerged clutching a shard of calcite that glowed faintly with memory, echoing through the Force. As she stepped into the lantern's glow, the shard pulsed, and the air around her thrummed with latent power. Witnesses, miners, weavers, and the hidden Jedi turned rebels felt a warmth wash over them, as though the galaxy's heartbeat aligned with her breath. Word of Lina's emergence reached Coruscant in a ripple of encoded transmissions. The Jedi Council, long reclusive, wary of intervening so openly, received the news with alarm and hope entwined. Master Kin Solari, one of the Order's last guardians, convened an emergency conclave in the twilight-lit chambers of the temple's outer wing. "A child born beneath massacre," she murmured, "carries the wound of this world in her veins and the promise of its healing." Within hours, Jedi ships, once bound by the Council's reluctance, departed for Ghorman. Among them were Master Solari and her protégé, the young knight Trask Ven, both carrying woven data crystals bearing Lina's vital signs and the pleas of her protectors. The journey through hyperspace was silent but urgent, a current of destiny propelling them toward a world on the brink of revolt. On Ghorman's surface, Lina's presence reshaped the survivors' resolve. Eldra Norris cradled the child beneath the skeletal remains of Tarkin's cruiser, brushing soot from her brow. Lina's emerald eyes flared as she reached out, and a gust of wind uncoiled around them, stirring lantern embers into swirling motes of light. Survivors gasped at the sight, first fear, then awe, recognizing that the Force, long dormant on Ghorman, had awakened in a single heartbeat. When the Jedi arrived, their arrival was heralded not by martial display, but by soft ripples in the Force that the child's presence amplified. Master Solari disembarked, robes trailing across cracked stone, and approached Lina with reverence. The child looked up, and in that gaze Solari saw not only trauma, but untapped potential, an innate ability to call upon the Force to protect, to heal, to inspire hope. Under a shattered tree canopy, the Jedi held a small ceremony. Trask Ven ignited his saber in gentle arcs, illuminating carved runes that once marked Ghorman's ancient shrines. Solari placed a hand on Lina's shoulder, guiding her to lay her glowing calcite shard upon the runic stone. The shard's light merged with the saber's glow, sending ripples of healing energy through the wounded earth, knitting fractured paths and coaxing blossoms from scorched soil. Witnesses wept at this silent testament, that a single child could turn the tide of grief into the dawn of purpose. Rebel leaders pledged to protect Lina at all costs, weaving her into the mythology of their cause. Supplies once hoarded for self-preservation were diverted to build a sanctuary beneath the old Jedi shrine, its halls reawakened as a place of refuge and instruction. News of Lina's arrival spread across hidden channels, galvanizing distant cells. On Alderaan, Bail Organa tasked his envoys with sending instructors and medic droids to Ghorman's newly established Jedi refuge. Garm Bel Iblis allocated starfighter escorts to guide supplies bypassing Imperial patrols. Even the defected star destroyers of the Imperial Schism dispatched salvage teams to reclaim shattered Jedi relics, lightsaber crystals, battered holocrons, and ancient texts to replenish the fledgling temple's archives. As Lena's tiny hand traced symbols in the air, recruits felt a surge of courage. Rebels trained in the courtyard beneath twin moons, forging weapons and tactics. Yet each pause in their drills was marked by shared glances toward the Jedi shrine, praying for her safety and growth. In whispered cycles around campfires, they spoke of the prophecy born in her, weaving tales of the child who would one day bring balance, not through conquest, but through compassion. On Coruscant, council chambers hesitated no longer. The risk of exposure was outweighed by destiny's pull. They dispatched additional Jedi to Ghorman, masters of healing, scholars of the Force, and guardians of peace. Palpatine's agents scrambled to intercept, but Lena's bond with the Force created ripples that eluded Imperial sensors, guiding Jedi ships through hidden routes. Beneath the rebuilt beams of the shrine, Lena stood with Master Solari, her hand still glowing with calcite light. Solari knelt and presented a simple wooden hilt. Lena's first lightsaber training tool, an instrument of peace shaped from Ghorman wood and infused with newfound hope. The child accepted it with a solemn nod, her eyes reflecting the lantern's glow and the galaxy's brightening future. Thus, the awakening of a nascent Force-sensitive child catalyzed the Jedi Council's last zeal, transforming an enclave of rebels into a cradle of hope. In Lena Sor's outstretched hand, the ashes of Ghorman's massacre found redemption. And as the shrine's spires caught the morning sun, the promise of unity between Jedi, rebels, and all sentient life shone like a beacon across the stars. A stillness deeper than darkness fell over Ghorman's shattered plains as the twin moons aligned in a silent celestial duet. Beneath their pale glow, the carved stones of an ancient Jedi enclave, long buried beneath calcite sands, stirred with dormant power. Eldra Norris, lantern in hand, led a small band of survivors into the heart of the ruined sanctuary, guided by whispered tales of a forgotten portal, the world between worlds, a bridge across time itself. The entrance lay hidden within concentric circles of glowing runes, etched into the courtyard's cracked floor. As Eldra stepped upon the central glyph, it pulsed beneath her weight, awakening veins of pale light that snaked outward like living roots. She brushed soot from an overgrown holocron pedestal and placed upon it the glowing shard Lena Sor had carried since the massacre. In that instant, the runes flared in unison, and the air rippled like water disturbed by a droplet. Above them, the fabric of night convulsed. A shimmering rift tore open the sky's tapestry, a vertical tear of swirling gold and indigo that spilled otherworldly winds across the ruins. Fragments of memory drifted through the portal, brief visions of past heroes, fallen nations, and distant futures. The survivors watched in hushed reverence as stars unseen by any chart spun through the aperture, and with them came a presence both ancient and urgent. From the luminous corridor stepped a lone figure, resplendent in robes of cerulean and white. His eyes, bright as starlight, scanned the gathered refugees with a mixture of solemnity and hope. It was the Chosen One, an echo of prophecy made flesh, drawn by the convergence of grief and destiny that now defined Ghorman's fate. His lightsaber remained unlit at his side, its hilt carved with runes matching those of the portal. Eldra dropped to one knee, lantern trembling in her grasp. The Chosen One raised a hand, palm outward, and the lantern's glow flared into pure light, illuminating faces etched with weariness and wonder. His voice rang across the courtyard, not in words, but in a chorus of whispered emotion felt within each heart. Sorrow, resolve, and the promise of renewal. Behind him, the portal shimmered again, revealing currents of time that flowed like rivers of possibility. The Chosen One stepped fully onto Ghorman's soil, and as he did, the ground beneath the memorial crosses trembled. One by one, their markers shifted, petals falling away to reveal hidden glyphs that pulsed with light. The crosses themselves became conduits for hope, each inscribed with names that would no longer be forgotten. In that moment, time itself bent to the will of the living force. Visions of Ghorman's past, its untouched forests, thriving looms, and peaceful harvests, flooded the minds of all present, a gentle reminder of what the world had been. Then, glimpses of future struggles, shadowed battles, stolen freedoms, and flickering embers of rebellion wove through their thoughts, igniting determination to forge a better tomorrow. The Chosen One ignited his lightsaber, its dual blades humming in harmony as their soft glow traced arcs through the portal's light. With a single sweep, he painted a symbol in the air, a rising phoenix encircled by twin moons, and the image burned into the memories of all who watched. It was the emblem of a new dawn, hope reborn from tragedy, unity born from loss. As the portal pulsed one final time, the Chosen One addressed the survivors in a voice both gentle and resolute. Though his words were carried on the winds of the portal, each listener perceived them within their own mind, as if whispered by the Force itself. From the ashes of sorrow, the light endures. Stand together and shape your destiny. Then, as silently as it had opened, the world between worlds closed. The rift's shimmering strands collapsed inward, stitching the sky's tapestry whole once more. The winds died, and the courtyard was still, save for the soft glow of the lanterns and the steady hum of the Chosen One's lightsaber. Eldra rose, tears shining in her eyes as she met the Chosen One's gaze. Around them, survivors clasped hands, their disparate wounds and losses united by a single purpose. The portal's legacy lingered in the air, a reminder that time and fate could converge, that even the darkest moment could birth a turning point. Tonight, Ghorman's survivors were no longer victims but guardians of destiny. Under the watchful gaze of the Chosen One, they kindled the final spark, one that would spread across star systems, forging the Rebel Alliance's first covenant. That hope, when guided by destiny's call, could transcend any shadow.